Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to this Harvista webinar. I'm Juliana Manco, I'm Portfolio Director for AgroFresh. I'm responsible for Harvista. And today, the objective of this webinar is to show the new advances that we have for harvest application with drones. Today I have here as a presenter Zachary Ray, a technical manager for AgroFresh. I will pass the word to Zach and welcome everyone. If you have questions, please write the questions in the chat and we will be responding the questions in the end of the webinar, okay? Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Juliana. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zachary Ray, and I am the technical manager for R&D here in the eastern portion of the U.S. as well as in Canada here at AgroFresh. And I'm also the North American lead for R&D technologies and Harvista technologies specifically. I'd like to acknowledge Roberto Jara. He's the global lead for Harvista technologies on the R&D side, and he leads a lot of R&D efforts for Harvista around the world. And he's also going to be leading the Spanish language version of this webinar later today, and he helped the organization of this workshop and may be on the line later for some questions as well. But the focus of this talk is on drone applications of Harvista in both apples and in pears as well. And we'll talk through field performance. We'll go over the application technology itself and then the harvest flexibility that this product provides. So if you take a look at the agenda here, you'll see that we are going to cover the harvest management challenge. This is focused on the commercial outcomes of delaying harvest, the trade-offs that you often see when you delay harvest, and the roles that ethylene plays as a plant hormone in the ripening process itself. We're going to cover the basics of what Harvista actually is, what the mode of action of this product is, and the benefits that it can provide in both apples and pears. Then we're going to go and talk a little bit about why growers might choose to apply products through drones in a general sense, and then why Harvista specifically is really a great fit for drone application for this product. I will share some key results focused on apples and pears as well. And then we'll talk through what some of our recommendations are and address any questions that you might have. Open the floor up to some discussion there. So harvest management is really a continual challenge for apple and pear growers alike. And this is especially true when you're focused on balancing labor and overlapping harvesting windows, all while waiting for optimal fruit size development and red color development, as well as waiting for maintaining and balancing the internal quality. Of course, for growers and packers, the fruit size is going to strongly impact your economic returns, as will the color. And for consumers and retailers, the red color specifically is going to influence very strongly the perceptions of how ripe that fruit is, how fresh the fruit is, the overall shelf appeal that people experience when seeing that fruit in the stores. And then the red blush, as that red blush color increases, the chance of entering premium categories is going to increase alongside that. So while growers are looking to increase, the fruit size and the color, red color development as well, it's really important to consider that ensuring fruit quality and the storage potential that lies ahead to support the ability to successfully sell and commercialize that fruit is really important, and it can often be a very difficult line to walk. So in an ideal world, you can see that delaying the harvest will increase both the size of the fruit, as you can see here in this graph on the top, as well as the red color development shown here as we move from a commercial harvest into what I would consider to be a delayed harvest window. You can see visually going from fancy to extra fancy and premium grade fruit is also going to greatly impact the color development, greatly impact the commercial grade, the pack out potential, economic returns. But there's trade-offs that you'll experience when you delay harvest. And leaving the fruit on the tree through these more advanced stages of maturation can really exacerbate some of those trade-offs that you see. So while delaying the harvest can increase the size of the fruit, it can promote the red color development, it can also accelerate these maturity-related risks that we see that ultimately result in losses for the grower. So if you take a look at this figure on the left, this represents the ethylene production that increases exponentially with delays in the harvesting date. The figure in the center shows the relationship between the starch index and the firmness. And you can see that as the firmness declines, the starch index increases, representing increases in the conversion of starch to sugar. And at the same time, that reduction in firmness is impacting the texture and the storability of the fruit as it continues to physiologically mature on the tree. And then with these increases in ethylene production that accelerate the maturation process, it accelerates the reduction in firmness, the conversion of starch to sugars, we see that the fruit drop, or the premature abscission of the fruit, is going to exponentially increase alongside with the ethylene increases in ethylene production. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced these trade-offs firsthand, hoping to keep fruit on the tree, managing orchard blocks across different operations, waiting for adequate color development before the harvest, and experiencing fruit drop, experiencing declines in firmness and internal quality. And this is something that we're hoping to be able to more effectively avoid. So since I mentioned ethylene before, I just want to take a moment here to explain exactly what ethylene is and highlight the role that it plays in the ripening process. Ethylene is a plant hormone that really drives the ripening process. And this is true both on the pre-harvest side and on the post-harvest side, depending on exactly what commodity you're talking about, and then also considering the senescence process. Ethylene will accelerate the senescence and the aging, the chlorophyll degradation, the general decline that you see post-harvest in so many commodities. In apples, you can look at this graph to see that as the fruit is maturing from 60 days after full bloom, a small green immature apple, up to a fruit that's ready to eat, you're seeing this increase in ethylene perception throughout the process. And this process is partly called and partly attributed to the autocatalytic ethylene biosynthesis, meaning that as ethylene is perceived and sensed, more ethylene will continue to be produced. And this creates a positive reinforcement, a positive feedback loop that can cause a lot of downstream effects that ultimately will coordinate changes in fruit color, changes in the texture development, changes in development of aroma volatiles, the conversion of starch to sugars. And of course, this process is necessary to actually make an apple that will taste like an apple, that is marketable and desirable for consumers. But still, that uncontrollable rise in ethylene can also pose challenges in terms of the trade-offs that we might experience: reductions in firmness, increases in fruit drop, and being able to mitigate that and balance those is going to become increasingly important. So Harvista is a plant growth regulator that's based on 1-methylcyclopropene, or 1-MCP. And this is a compound that can inhibit the action of the plant hormone ethylene directly. So the product actually blocks the perception of ethylene at the receptor level by binding to ethylene receptors, and then actually preventing a lot of those downstream ethylene responses that we talked about, those rapid increases in ethylene biosynthesis that result in fruit drop, loss of firmness, increase of conversion of starch to sugars. And the best way to think about this process is to consider the receptor as a lock. And while ethylene is a key that can fit inside the lock and turn the lock to open the door, unleashing these downstream impacts of ethylene perception, 1-MCP or Harvista is a key that's similar enough to really fit inside the lock, but it won't turn the key, open the door, and then unleash this downstream cascade of impacts that we experience with ethylene perception. So Harvista translates ethylene management into really practical benefits for growers. So by slowing the progression of the fruit maturation process, it actually provides more flexibility to manage harvest timing, to allow additional time for fruit to sit on the tree and develop color, while also retaining firmness and retaining storage potential. This Harvista also often mediates the incidence of some near harvest physiological disorders. For example, water core, greasiness, stem end splitting. These can all be mitigated with the application of Harvista. Although longer term storage disorders that are more tied to cold storage and longer term periods of storage, such as superficial scald, will not really be mitigated through the application of Harvista. And that's why we don't ever consider Harvista to be an alternative or a replacement to post-harvest 1-MCP through SmartFresh. So Harvista mitigates many of the risks of delayed harvest that I highlighted earlier in the process by suppressing the ethylene rise that's associated with delaying harvest. Growers will often ask if Harvista can completely stop the ripening process, and that would be negatively impacting the color development, negatively impacting the internal quality, having an apple that's more in line with one of those, under mature fruits that I showed in the progression of ripe from very underripe to a fully mature and fully ripe fruit. But that process is still happening. As you can see, the ethylene production is not zero, and there's still ethylene production taking place with the application of Harvista. And the fruit can continue to mature at just a more manageable rate as compared to the untreated controls. You can see that the starch degradation is more gradual. You're able to manage that more. And then in addition, there's a higher uniformity in the fruit after being treated with Harvista as compared to in the untreated control, where some fruit still contains a lot of starch and other fruits have progressed very rapidly into the conversion of starch to sugars. So at that reduced ethylene production with the application of Harvista, you can see that flesh firmness, which is shown in this top graph here, is higher and declines more gradually as compared to the untreated fruit. And then with that increased firmness, reduced ethylene biosynthesis, and that autocatalytic cascade of ethylene biosynthesis in the fruit, you'll see that there's also a comparable decline in the cumulative fruit drop, or the premature fruit abscission in this case, that you can see in the orchard. And in the untreated fruit, as compared to the Harvista, you can see very clearly in this picture how much fruit can be saved and retained on the tree with the application of Harvista as compared to the untreated control. And then this is just to highlight, as I mentioned, the increases in flesh firmness as well as reductions in fruit drop that you'd experience with the application of Harvista. So in addition to mitigating some of those trade-offs, Harvista can help to directly convert that extra time on the tree into a clear commercial value through greater red color development and also increases in fruit size. And this is especially apparent when you actually go back and compare the commercial harvest date to a delayed harvest with the application of Harvista. So looking at the red color in this case at 0 days after the commercial harvest as compared to a 7 or 14-day delay, you can see that Harvista may provide additional red color development while also promoting increases in fruit size, all while managing ethylene biosynthesis, the fruit drop, the loss of internal quality. And this is the power that Harvista can really directly convert that extra time into clear value in your operations. Then I want to take a step back here and talk about drone applications in general. Drones, they provide a lot of operational advantages in the modern orchard, and they provide flexibility in challenging conditions. If you have uneven terrain, if you have obstacles in your orchard, they allow for the efficient use of labor and allow for parallel operations, especially when you have larger operations, you have tractors that you'd like to dedicate to harvest or other activities in different blocks, while still being able to treat your fruit with Harvista that are in that stage earlier in their development. And drones are efficient. They cover larger areas in a much shorter period of time as compared to ground application. They use less water and they use less fossil fuels. And they also reduce the soil traffic and the compaction that you'd see on your orchard floor. So overall, drones do offer a lot of operational flexibility and efficiencies into your operations. Now for Harvista specifically, we do consider drones to be a complementary platform, oftentimes even a direct alternative to our Harvista kit. Harvista applications by drones, they're technically feasible. They have low water volume applications, especially compared to the field application using a kit that leads to efficient execution in the field. And then drones can be direct loaded into the tank with direct dilution rather than, so you're able to avoid the injection approach that we have in our in traditional injection kits. This is generally a simpler setup. It has a shorter calibration workflow, and the label already supports application via drones, aerial applications in the US. So technically very feasible and providing a lot of operational advantages too. Drones, this is going to be especially true in terms of those operational advantages when looking at peak harvest periods during very active orchard operations. As I mentioned, the power of parallel operations, being able to dedicate your tractor to other purposes, as well as working in high-tech or large multi-variety orchards. These may employ reflective films. They may have shade or hail netting. They may also have advanced field setups. They may have high-intensity planting or high-density operations, and then other overlapping maturity windows across varieties that can pose challenges with allocating tractor use for application. And drone is another tool that can be used in that case. So in order to actually validate that this new technology worked in Harvista, we evaluated the spray coverage across and throughout the canopy, looking at the top, the middle, the bottom, and even the ground using these water-sensitive cards to be able to characterize the deposition of spray and the droplet distribution. And you can see in the pictures of the over-the-row flight in different areas of the canopy, this figure highlighting the average spray deposition by canopy level. We were really able to achieve uniform distribution of droplets throughout the canopy, which ultimately led us to begin to evaluate beyond technical validation of the application itself, if this is biologically feasible when applied through drone application. And this was really the critical question. Harvista can be applied through a drone. It's operationally feasible. It certainly provides a lot of advantages in that regard, but will it be biologically effective? And through a lot of our R&D efforts, we found very similar and oftentimes superior performance of Harvista applied through drones. And I'm going to walk through some results in both apples and pears, and you can decide if that's something that you see as suitable for your operation. But we certainly see a lot of promise in this technology. So I will start off with apples, and I'm going to highlight some results in Brookfield, Gala, and Rosy Glow apples in the Pink Lady group. And I have a little bit of information about Honeycrisp as well. But this is just to highlight that we have limited time in a short webinar, and we really do see a lot of similar results across varieties and great performance, even beyond the varieties that I'm going to highlight today. So if you have specific questions or you'd like more information on a particular variety, please reach out to us and we can certainly share that information and work with you. But as you can see here in both Brookfield and in Gala apples, Harvista applied by drone, which is shown in the blue line, maintains firmness values that were equal to or greater than the conventional Harvista kit, which is shown in green. And then in Gala apples, both application methods actually outperformed the untreated control, which is shown here in black, with the drone application showing the most clear retention of firmness, even more higher efficacy than the Harvista kit. In terms of the starch progression, both Brookfield and Gala consistently showed slower starch degradation compared to both the conventional kit as well as the untreated control in certain cases. So in Gala, the performance between the Harvista treatments was actually fairly similar, and both were equally effective as compared to the untreated control, where lower values are representing lower earlier stages in the conversion of starch to sugar and lower maturity fruit. So Harvista treatments were actually most effective in this range between 7 and 14 days after Harvista application, but this result really varied by trial, by application method, and then by variety as well. But in general, that was what we were seeing, and we were seeing comparable, if not improved performance of the starch index and starch progression over time with the drone application as compared to the kit. So this slide here, focused on Brookfield apple again, shows the starch degradation categories, or the distribution of starch degradation across different stages of physiological maturity at 7, 14, and 21 days after application. And these black bars represent the earlier developmental stages. They represent higher starch integrity with less conversion of starch to sugar. You'll see that both Harvista application methods increase the percentage of fruits that have this lower starch pattern index as compared to the untreated control. And this is true at 7 days, 14 days, and 21 days after Harvista application. And there's also an improvement in the uniformity of the fruit, where greater percentage of fruit is in this lower starch degradation class, and you see less spread into the advanced and very advanced stages of physiological maturity with the application of Harvista. And this is true across all of these harvesting dates. And the performance of the kit and the drone are fairly similar. But with the drone application, we do see a smaller percentage of fruit achieving this advanced stage of maturity at both 14 and especially at 21 days after application compared to the kit application and certainly compared to the untreated control. So again, this is highlighting that the Harvista kit and the Harvista drone perform similarly, and the drone may provide some additional advantages in terms of the uniformity of fruit within starch degradation classes and the distribution of starch degradation or starch pattern indices. So now switching gears to the Pink Lady group of apples, we'll see really similar results. Looking at firmness retention in these two graphs on the left here, you'll see that the drone application shown in blue very consistently outperforms the application of the kit, which is shown in green. Both Harvista application methods generally outperformed the control as well, especially in the plot on the top left and always with the application through drone. The plots on the right show the starch pattern index, where lower numbers, again, represent lower stages of physiological maturity, representing a higher starch integrity and less conversion of starch to sugar. Across both of these studies, the starch degradation was slower when Harvista was applied through a drone. And Harvista and both application methods actually reduced the starch to sugar conversion compared to the untreated control. So while the conventional kit also did delay the maturation process, the drone ultimately did provide the most consistent benefit across firmness and starch progression. So this graph shows the starch progression and the starch degradation classes, again, the distribution of starch degradation at 7, 14, and 21 days after Harvista application, this time for the Pink Lady group of apples. The darker values are representing that lower physiological maturity. And you can see that while both Harvista application methods really did maintain a lower stage of physiological maturity and a higher starch integrity, the application with the drone very clearly shows the best effect across each harvest, supporting its ability to really effectively mitigate the starch degradation into slow maturity. And these results are actually even more clear in this trial than in the Gala group of apples. If you look at the harvest on 14 days after application, I just want to highlight that over 90% of the fruit in the untreated control is considered to be very advanced, physiologically mature, over mature with a starch pattern index of 8 to 10 on this particular scale, while just about 20% in the Harvista treated with a kit are in this particular physiological stage at that harvest. And then in the Harvista treated through drone, only 2% of the fruit, of all the fruit, were in this stage of physiological maturity, to highlight the uniformity benefit that you have, as well as really that reduction in the extreme overmature fruit that you may experience, which would be most prone to reductions in firmness, to early premature fruit drop and other quality attribute concerns as well. So while it's great to see impacts in firmness and starch degradation, it's important to then bring it back to ethylene, because ethylene biosynthesis is really what provides us the context to understand how we're seeing these particular benefits and what's driving that physiologically. So in Brookfield and in Gala, you can see that the fruit that was harvested at 21 days after harvest application in the untreated control resulted in really high increases in the ethylene biosynthesis as compared to the similar treatments with Harvista on both the drone and the kit. So from 14 to 21 days in Brookfield, very small change in the ethylene biosynthesis that you see. But when looking at the untreated control, you see that really high increase in ethylene production. And that's reflected in this trial with Gala as well, which just goes to show why we experience reductions in firmness, why we experience dropped fruit, why we experience cracking and other senescence-related disorders. This greater reduction in ethylene biosynthesis and rosy glow as well relates back to what I showed you in terms of the distribution of starch degradation classes in the previous slide, where even greater benefits were really observed compared to the Gala fruit. And you can see this is driven, particularly in this case with rosy glow, by much higher increases in ethylene production and very, very controlled ethylene production in the two Harvista treatments here, using both the conventional kit and the drone application. And this explains why you see such a difference, going back to this slide, in the untreated control having advanced stages of physiological maturity. So ultimately, both of the Harvista application methods very consistently reduced the ethylene production. And this was across Brookfield, Gala, Rosy Glow varieties. And drone application delivered an ethylene suppression that was very similar to the conventional application. So I want to bring this back to yield, because as we've shown in the previous slides, Harvista shows ethylene biosynthesis, and it slows that down, promotes firmness retention, and it also mediates the degradation of starch, while also allowing for some additional flexibility in harvest and extending the time on the tree. But when we extend the time on the tree, the benefits of this slower fruit maturation process allows you to keep the fruit on the tree for more time, which can result in increases and improvements in crop yield and fruit size, and can also allow for the additional consolidation of harvests, saving labor costs too. So in Brookfield Gala, we've observed yield increases of about 13%, and this is shown in comparing the untreated fruit to the Harvista treated fruit. And we did this all while reducing the number of harvests from 3 picks in the untreated control to just 2 picks in the Harvista treated fruit, with an application delay. And you can see the dates of these particular harvests here. In Honeycrisp, Harvista application actually resulted in 295 more boxes per acre packed. And this is more boxes of premium size per acre too. As you can see, a lot of increase in the 72 and 64 count fruit. Count boxes where we actually have larger fruit, so you have less fruit in a particular box. So these increase in boxes is driven by the fact that we have larger fruit. We have more time on the tree, and then reductions in fruit drop as well that allow more of the fruit that is on the tree to ultimately be packed and sold. So these are just some examples really of the successes that we see with Harvista, and the results have been proven in many different varieties, different production regions throughout the world. And like I mentioned, if you are interested in using Harvista and other varieties than the ones we've discussed today, we're happy to discuss more in terms of what that may look like for your specific operations and compatibility with particular varieties. So now I'm going to go through some results in Bartlett pears, because while Harvista is labeled for palm fruits as well as cherries and blueberries in the US, I'm focusing on palm fruits here today and drone application. But I want to show that it's not just apples that will enjoy these benefits, but Bartlett pears are a great candidate for Harvista application with drones as well. So in pears, Harvista can similarly delay that ripening process, similarly extend the harvesting window that we see. The application of our Harvista product in pears actually slows the ethylene biosynthesis very similarly to how it does in apples, and helps to maintain more firm, more uniform fruit on the tree, and also to retain a more green background color that has an improved storability for shelf life ahead and reduced handling damage due to often higher firmness at harvest and lower stages of maturity. So here you can see that Harvista maintains firmness in pears, not just at harvest, but after shelf life periods as well. The graph on the left is focusing on firmness immediately after harvest with Harvista application. Again, drones shown in blue, Harvista application kit shown in green, and the untreated control shown in black here. And you can see that very consistently at 7, at 10, at 15 days after application in fruit that was treated with Harvista, the firmness is consistently higher than in the untreated control. And both Harvista application methods, the drone and the kit, were performing very similarly in terms of maintaining firmness at each of these assessments. Then fruit that was harvested at 7 days, 14 days, or 21 days after Harvista application in a different study was also stored for a short shelf life period that ranged from 8 days in this particular harvest to 15 days in the 7 days after Harvista application harvest. And this was focused on evaluating the impacts of firmness after this shelf life period, this simulated shelf life period with a 20 degrees Celsius or relatively room temperature treatment. And in scenarios where we evaluated both earlier harvests with longer storage shelf lives and later harvests with more physiologically mature fruit and shorter shelf life periods. In both of these scenarios, we see that the firmness in the Harvista treated fruit is much higher than the firmness in the untreated control. And this goes to show the firmness that can be maintained not only on the tree, but immediately in storage and in shelf life periods as well, that can ultimately impact the performance and storability of this fruit ahead. Now, if you look, just as we saw in the application at harvest, or the firmness at harvest, in the firmness after the shelf life period, you can see that not only do we have this benefit from Harvista application, but the two technologies applying through kit or through drone are virtually equal. So this slide here shows the visual color response that you'll see at harvest, as well as a shelf life period as well, similar to the previous slide. So both Harvista application methods ultimately maintained a more green color as compared to the untreated control after the shelf life period. And while the untreated control is considered more of a yellow based on the hue angle and a more advanced stage of color development and physiological maturity, the two Harvista treatments can be considered more of a green hue with more delayed color change and improved storability potential too. I just want to highlight the hue angle values are very similar between the Harvista kit and the Harvista drone, just providing further support here that applying Harvista through either of these technologies provides very similar benefits as compared to an untreated control. So to relate these differences in firmness and color back to ethylene perception and production, as I did in apples, you can see that the untreated fruit shows this earlier and sharper rise in ethylene peaks during shelf life periods, as compared to the peak, the more dulled and delayed peak that you see in ethylene production after with Harvista application. And although this is in a shelf life, you can also extrapolate some of this information in terms of differences in ethylene biosynthesis and ethylene perception. That would be true to a certain extent on the tree as well. And this goes to explain some of the differences that we see in color development, in firmness retention, in fruit drop control. So both application methods really performed similarly here. Something I want to highlight that, they delayed that ethylene peak and they also reduced the climacteric ethylene response, which will improve the storability of that fruit post-harvest and will control a lot of those trade-offs that we discussed on the pre-harvest side. So then to bring this all back around to yield, similarly to the discussion in apple, pears really do provide, or Harvista provides benefits in pears through improving the flexibility of harvest, through improving the fruit uniformity, but that added time on the tree will also similarly allow for additional fruit size development and yield increases. In this particular example with Bartlett pears, we had an 8-day delay in harvest that also allowed all of the fruit to be harvested in 1 day as compared to a split harvest in the untreated control. Additionally, on top of consolidating the harvest into just one, we increased the number of bins that were packed from 86 bins in the untreated control to 99 bins picked in the Harvista treatment. And in addition to the number of bins that were packed, this is directly relevant and relates back to the overall yield that we saw. And in the Harvista treated fruit, we see increases of about 16% with an 8-day delay in harvest. And across different studies throughout internal and customer-focused studies at AgroFresh, we found that delaying the harvest by between 8 and 14 days in Bartlett pears can promote this additional fruit size and yield development while still controlling the fruit drop that we see and still controlling the mitigating decline in firmness and maintaining internal quality. So in conclusion, I'd really like to leave you with 3 key messages here. The first is that harvest management remains an ongoing challenge for apple and pear growers. Growers are really faced constantly with balancing the size and the color of their fruit with the firmness, the internal maturity, the concern of fruit drop, and then the storage potential of that fruit too. The second message is that Harvista helps to manage these trade-offs in a more effective way. So by mediating the ethylene response and that autocatalytic rise in ethylene production that I showed, Harvista helps to actually maintain the firmness, to delay starch degradation, to reduce fruit drop, and to really open the door for extended harvest windows, not only promoting additional increases in fruit size and yield, commercial grades, but also allowing for much needed flexibility in the harvest scheduling activities, especially when you're working in multiple operations with different varieties, large orchards, and you can only get to so much fruit for harvest at a time. This provides that flexibility that helps to maintain optimal quality in the fruit. The third message here is that drone application really proved to be not only technically viable, but biologically effective too. And this is a platform that we can use to apply Harvista, and a complementary platform that we can use to transform additional time into clear commercial value for your operations. We found that it was comparable to, and in some cases even superior to, application with the conventional kit. In Bartlett pears, it resulted in fruit that was firmer, fruit that was greener, fruit that was physiologically less mature, and with ethylene responses that were practically equivalent to those with the Harvista kit. In general, we recommend considering drone as a complementary platform for your operations. And of course, your choice for that should be based on the layout of your orchard, your own operational logistics, application windows and timing, environmental conditions that may impact the ability to apply either by drone or by kit. And then, of course, if you're outside the US, or if you're adhering to local label instructions, would also be important to do. Ultimately, Harvista will turn that extra time on the tree into additional commercial value, right? And drone application can expand these options that you have to capture that value without sacrificing the biological efficacy of the product. So with that, I'm happy to open the floor to address any questions that you might have. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for your interest in this product, and excited to hear and to have a great discussion about any questions that you have.
Thank you, Zach, for your presentation. We have one question in the chat, and I invite everyone to add more questions here if they have. So the first question I have is, does Harvista have the risk of blocking the sprayers when used in drones?
Yeah, so one, I'm going to just use that opportunity first to talk a little bit about the difference in the spray technology between drone and the Harvista kit. So with the Harvista kit, typically, unless you're using our Harvista mix product, you're using the injection kit that will inject Harvista in line with water throughout your application process. And that can have a more complicated calibration process as compared to this direct dilution that we have with drone, which is another operational advantage that we find a lot of the time of applying Harvista through drone technology. And then now to just go back, the question was focused on, does it have a risk in blocking the sprayer? Not particularly, especially because we've evaluated different dilution rates, and our recommendation would be a minimum of 5 gallons of water per acre total spray volume, with a 1 gallon per acre Harvista application rate. And this 4-to-1 dilution of Harvista to water to Harvista provides enough viscosity in the solution that it can actually pass through sprayers without having any significant issues in clogging.
I think we don't have more questions. No. So thank you, Zach. Thank you, everyone who attended this webinar, and have a good season.
Thanks.
Thank you.